Hi everyone, I'm Molly. I recently made a video about my experience at Springridge Academy. This is sort of a part 2 to that video where I'm gonna share some things that I left out in the first one, as well as touch on some of the terminology that's common within the troubled teen industry. If you have not yet seen part 1, I highly recommend watching that one first in order to avoid confusion during this one. Before coming back and watching this one. And before I begin, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who has reached out to me about my first video. It means a lot to me that you guys have all connected. I also want to take a moment to thank the staff members who are helping to be a part of Breaking Code Silence for Springridge Academy. There's a lot of us speaking out who went through it, but to have adults who worked there is really huge in terms of corroborating the validity of the things that we had to endure there. So thank you. The first video was all about my own experiences, and this one is a lot about my own experience too, but I'm also wanting to use this opportunity to share some anonymous stories of other girls that I know that went to Springridge Academy and what they went through there. There's a term that I'm seeing coming up a lot with the Breaking Code Silence movement, which could be confusing to people who have not actually been gooned. So gooning is the term used for transporters who are hired by parents to kidnap their kids out of bed in the middle of the night in order to bring them to some type of center or program within the troubled teen industry. I was gooned when I was 17, so I was taken from bed, brought to the local airport, forced on an airplane, and sent to the Blue Ridge Mountains in the state of Georgia to a therapeutic wilderness program where I spent close to 3 months before attending Springridge Academy. I have a lot of friends and classmates that have also been gooned. One friend that I have was grabbed from her bed when she was just 13 years old by complete strangers who actually left marks on her back when they grabbed her. And I know another girl who was left with a sprained wrist when she was taken from her bed, being gooned. It's a very scary experience, as I'm sure you can imagine by hearing that. And I think can be exceptionally traumatizing for people who are being sent to treatment centers in order to heal from trauma, a lot of which including physical abuse. So I personally was told that they wouldn't use physical force if I complied and didn't question anything that was happening to me. And I was scared, so I didn't. And when you get sent to one of these places in the troubled teen industry, your clothes are taken and you have to squat with nothing on, even underwear, in order to prove that you are not hiding anything. Keeping in mind that most people sent to these places, these treatment centers, it is not court ordered. I had never been in any trouble with the police and was treated as if I was a violent criminal. Another term that comes up a lot in Breaking Code Silence is the term isolation. In my first video, I used the term intro or introspection, and I've come to understand that these places use these terms frequently, and it looks pretty similar between lots of these programs. So what it means is that you are isolated from everyone. At the very least, this means losing the right to speak. It also means being strongly reprimanded or getting into a lot of trouble if you even accidentally make eye contact with somebody. In some cases, it means being locked away in some type of solitary confinement. In some schools, that can look like some type of concrete room that you can't leave and are underfed in. In some schools, it means pretending that the student is off campus receiving medical care when they're actually being held in a basement. In some cases for a week at a time with only a pencil and paper in order to ask for water, which they are often denied. Some other survivors of Springridge Academy have shared that they were locked in a basement while the rest of us thought that they were off campus receiving medical care. This did not happen to me, but I was horrified to find out that it was going on while simultaneously not shocked one bit based on my experience there. In my last video, I touched on the different levels or phases that Springridge Academy uses as it operates as a cult. In order to make it past each phase, you have to go through very intense trainings called challenge, change, and action, and there's one called commitment. I made it through challenge and change, but I did not complete action or commitment, as I never made it above phase 3 before I pulled myself from the program. During the first training, I was definitely in shock. There was nothing else that I had experienced in my life that came close to that level of intensity or strangeness, I guess. The exercise that stands out the most for me, as well as for a lot of the people that I've spoken with, was this towel beading exercise. So there's a towel that has a lot of duct tape around it, where Jeannie will push students to get really, really angry at their parents while beating up a chair very aggressively that is being held down by students who had already completed the training, which happens for an extended period of time. These students who had completed the training were known as staffers. Many of my fellow survivors collapsed because of extreme physical exertion after being screamed at for a long time to go harder. I remember being yelled at personally for a while because I wasn't crying, and I guess you're supposed to be during that, so I was called out and humiliated. After chatting with a lot of other people from the program, another exercise that stood out to them was the Lifeboat Exercise, which I did not do, but it took place in a dark room with your eyes closed and began with a guided meditation for about half an hour to lull the participants into a false sense of safety or security, where they are on a luxury cruise in paradise before it's suddenly interrupted by loud crashing and screaming, and they're told that the ship that they are on is sinking and they must get to a lifeboat, but there's only one lifeboat available. So then each person has 1 minute to speak about why their life is worthy of being saved, and if what they say about their life isn't considered good enough by Jeannie, then they have to leave the training. Each girl is then taken by the shoulders by staffers and led in front of each other girl who is yelling at them to die. Then they had to make a map of how their lives became so bad and present it publicly. If they didn't do a good enough job, they got kicked out. If you make it to the next morning, you have to make a statement about yourself that expresses who you truly are. And if it's not considered authentic enough to Jeannie, then you are forced to leave. And up to that point, Jeannie and other staffers talk privately about each participant's trauma, sharing very private information about each participant. And then they find a song that they think best represents the girl and her experience. And then the girls have to get into hair and makeup and forced into leotards and other revealing outfits against their will. And then the room is set up in like a horseshoe shape, and then one at a time, girls have to perform a dance while staffers scream, cheer, and wave flashlights at them. And if you didn't have enough of a breakthrough with your dance, you were asked to leave. And if you did succeed, every staffer surrounds the individual and rocks her back and forth while she lays there for an entire song. On the final day of that training, girls are blindfolded, led down a dark hallway, and forced into a dark room with chairs that they're forced to sit in. Their shoes and other accessories are removed without their consent, and staffers then massage the girls' arms and legs and shoulders with lotion, again without their consent. When the blindfolds are removed, staffers are in a tight formation in the center of the circle, and they're standing like statues holding candles with one lit candle. And the lit candle is passed to one person at a time while each participant states their personal contract. Another activity in one of the trainings was that participants were forced to carry a 5-pound sandbag everywhere they went for 6 weeks in order to symbolize the weight of negative beliefs that you carry. Then you are led into a room where peers have memorized your worst beliefs about you and have been taught all about you in order to trigger you best. And then your blindfold is removed and your peers scream your biggest insecurities at you. And then you have to talk back to them and then move on to the next peer who will do the same thing, and so on and so on. And then you have to do the same thing and yell at other students about their biggest insecurities. And then you're also blindfolded and driven out into the desert, not knowing where. You're pushed into the middle of the road in the dead of night. A CLD, which is a community life director, cuts a slit in the sandbag and says, walk, which is supposed to symbolize losing the weight of the previously mentioned negative beliefs, as sand falls out of the bag for 1 mile in the middle of nowhere in the dark. Moving on from the trainings, another thing that was really terrible was all of the gay conversion tactics that the school used. Any girls that didn't identify as straight were labeled as sexual predators and were publicly shamed frequently. There were several instances where girls who didn't dress or behave in the absurdly stereotypical feminine fashion were often put on assignments where they were forced to wear really girly dresses and a lot of makeup that they were so clearly very uncomfortable in. And they were paraded around the dorms and other parts of the property, which was just absolutely humiliating and uncomfortable for them and heartbreaking to see. Jeannie also told multiple girls that they weren't really gay or bisexual, that they had just been traumatized by men in their lives, so that's why they were avoiding men. In addition to this blatant homophobia, slut shaming was huge at SRA, absolutely huge. Pretty early on, I had to fill out these weird forms titled sexual history, where I had to list anyone I'd ever dated or kissed or other. My roommates had to as well, and this information was not kept confidential. It was constantly used to humiliate people about their past, both in large groups of people, and it was told to several people's parents as well. I can't remember if I said this in the last video, but lots of us also had to take accountability to any physical or sexual abuse that we had been through, such as acknowledging that if we hadn't gone to a certain location, then it wouldn't have happened. This way of viewing myself was definitely very harmful to me, not only at Spring Ridge Academy, but also after I came home. My self-worth was completely tanked, and I started spending time with people who were really bad or dangerous for me to be around, and engaging in more risk-taking behaviors than I had before, I guess. I went from feeling confident that something that had happened to me without my consent was not my fault, which I felt very confident in before going to SRA. And after, I felt like it was never something that I could overcome for a while. And there was a period of time following my returning to my hometown from SRA where I just hated myself and my life so much that I really just did not care what happened to me. I'm definitely not the only one that struggled since leaving SRA. I have a lot of friends who still don't know how to talk about what they went through. Lots of friends who were humiliated there and ridiculed for even like smoking weed and drinking prior, and then ended up leaving and using far harder drugs. I have one friend who died after her time at SRA. Lots of girls who went to SRA ended up attempting or actually doing it, committing suicide or dying of drug overdoses, which the school has never acknowledged. They claim that this stuff only happens to girls who don't complete all of their phases in their program, which is just a blatant lie. I know girls who were there for years and graduated who are still really messed up from the trauma that place put them through. There were very few adults working there who I felt totally safe with and who I felt actually cared about the girls. And if any of those caring adults stuck up for us with anything that happened, they were fired or otherwise punished. There were several adults that worked there that behaved very inappropriately towards students and continue to do so. And the school never acknowledged these things and did not do anything to make us feel safer with these individuals. They never accepted responsibility if something happened to one of the students because of them. But yet on several occasions forced students to report people from back home to police officers if they had been raped or otherwise assaulted. However, we were not given privacy, and the people that worked there often spoke for us during these situations, regardless of whether students wanted to report it. Having this type of decision be in the hands of somebody other than the survivor is unbelievably damaging, which the school should know, seeing as they specialize in healing from trauma. If you have been assaulted, then you know how horrible it feels to have so much control already taken from you, and then to feel once again out of control by someone else telling your story and not on your own timeline is an absolutely horrible feeling. Going off of the homophobia and slut shaming, another really damaging belief that is instilled in us is that we're incapable of having any type of relationship, be it romantic, sexual, platonic, etc. Anytime you became close with another person there, even just as friends, they labeled it as codependent and abusive, even if it was very healthy and a very supportive friendship. The amount of times that I witnessed Spring Ridge Academy violate HIPAA is just absolutely ridiculous. They would share with other students what medications some girls were on. They would share private information about girls who had been sexually assaulted. They shared all kinds of information from individual therapy sessions with large groups of girls, which was completely inappropriate and completely in violation of HIPAA. And you were rewarded, actually, if you shared private information about other girls with staff and therapists. There was a huge problem with dividing a small number of girls who were rewarded and never had to face any of the punishments that the rest of us did. I remember being told that if I didn't tell on myself and my friends for any possible rule we had ever broken, all the way down to taking an extra apple at lunch if we're hungry, then my friend wouldn't be allowed to see her mom who had flown a ways to see her. Speaking of parents being cut off, one of my friends was cut off from her mom, or at least the school tried to. Her dad is an addict who was not in recovery when he came to visit her, and she found empty bottles of alcohol throughout the hotel room that he was staying in. She came back and told the school, who denied that it happened and tried to gaslight her into believing that she didn't know what she was talking about and that she was lying. Spring Ridge Academy constantly denied that like anything had happened at home or that anything could be on the parents, and made all of the girls there out to be absolute monsters. Another time, this friend of mine was supposed to have a visit at Easter because she was on phase 3, so it was a lot of home visit, but she didn't feel comfortable staying with her dad, and instead wanted to stay with her mom, and her mom wanted her to stay with her as well. So they dropped her from phase 3 to phase 2, stating that it was because she wasn't actively participating enough in her classes, which was obvious BS, rather than just admitting that they didn't want her to see her own mother. Her dad started to use drugs again, and her therapist urged her mom to get a lawyer since he was trying to fight for custody. And when they did that, the therapist denied ever giving them any advice or ever having that conversation with them. This was one of the friends that I ran away with, and her mom was coming to get her to pull her from the program after we ran. And 5 police cars went up to the school with her mom because the school said that her mom was not going to come and get her and was not allowed to take her, despite the fact that it was completely within her mom's legal right to pull her from the program. My parents were brainwashed from the school, not to the extent as many others, seeing as they believe me now and feel badly about it, but they still did agree not to take me in if I left and to not have any contact with me. That did not actually stick. I spoke with my parents the day that I pulled myself, and they did end up taking me back in, but it did feel like a very valid threat at the time because they were just, I don't know, under such influence from the school, because the school is very good at manipulating parents. Something else I want to touch on is that the school on several occasions prescribed opiates to students who did not need them, despite claiming to be a treatment center that helped drug addicts. I had only ever smoked weed and drank alcohol, but was forced to be in not only Alcoholics Anonymous, but Narcotics Anonymous, just for marijuana, while my friends who actually really struggled with addiction were prescribed addictive medications. So the school had absolutely no idea what they were doing when it came to addiction services as well as medication distribution. And there were also a lot of girls that were denied medication. In fact, I believe they did such a disservice to so many people who started to use harder drugs after leaving SRA when their families wouldn't take them in under SRA's strict orders. There are so many things that I have said and could say about SRA. I think that I touched on everything or almost everything that I had been intending on speaking about this evening. I hope that I did anyway. I want to thank you all for watching. This is pretty intense stuff, so I appreciate you hearing my story. To my fellow survivors, both at Spring Ridge Academy and at all of the other similar treatment facilities in the troubled teen industry, I see you, I believe you, and we are breaking code silence together, and we are going to shut these places down.